Localization is, so it starts from a need. The client has a need for their e-learning content to be used in regions of the world that have different languages and different cultures. So, so the e-learning content has to be translated, for one, so that it can be, read in different languages. But it also has to be, when we say localized, we mean that text has to be converted in such a way as to be relevant to the people of those regions. So, for example, if there's slang and lingo that are used in different languages or different regions, then that has to be edited out and replaced with something regionally specific. We're far more likely to have localization discussions with our clients at the outset of a project. It's not something that usually comes up without the client knowing it. The clients know the regions they support, they know their needs that way, usually up front. Absolutely. There's the effort to take a English course and localize it after the fact. It can be kind of costly, and you have to go back and redo a lot of the English content as well to get something that's appropriate for localization. The language is only one part of it, and when we're designing a course, we'll make sure that we're using language that's going to be appropriate for regions, for taking out things like culturally specific humor and lingo and so on that isn't going to cross over regions. But there's also an element of the way that we build the course, so that so for example, we're only going to use, there's a certain set of images that we won't want to use in a course that we're going to localize. When we put text on a screen, you have to think English language is going to take up this much space, and French is always a little bit longer, so French is going to take up that much space. We want to make sure we have the space available for whatever expansion is going to result as we move into a different language. Right. So if we're going to write a course that requires us to have all hands on deck to build a best-of-breed solution, those are two idioms that aren't going to translate into a different region. So we're going to put that, instead of using those idioms, we're going to use just plain language to describe what the content's trying to express. There's a smaller set of considerations probably when it comes to graphical elements, but there's things that you don't want to show. You don't want to show any symbols that don't have the same meaning in different cultures. Certainly any kind of religious symbol or anything like that. Images of hands and hand gestures and so on aren't necessarily going to cross cultures the way that you'd expect them to. As an e-learning development company, we don't, but our clients often come to us with jargon terms or business-specific terms that their company has developed over time. That can be things like just quick acronyms and stuff like that that the client uses, the North American branch uses routinely, and everybody knows what they mean. And when it comes to developing the English, we'll ask, do you want us to use this term? And the client says, yeah, we always refer to it as the Ep8. And so on. Well, that might not be how it translates. That might not be what it means, when it's used in another part of the world. So we want to make sure that if the jargon is to be used, then it's going to cross cultures and cross regions, just like anything else. The way that we're going to do our localization is we're going to develop the English version of the course first, and then we will work with a localization company to translate the text and highlight or change any areas that have this sort of regional specificity. In different development architectures, that can be a matter of producing an XML script and sending that to a localization partner, typically, which is somebody who's got all the languages and all the localization capabilities in-house. In other cases, some development tools the localization partner is familiar with, and we can just send the English course to them, and expect to receive back for all intents and purposes, localized version of the course. I think a buyer should be able to ask an e-learning provider what regions they support. I think, you know, the main thing is that the e-learning partner doesn't have to have an office here and an office in Europe to support North America and Europe. The e-learning provider should understand everything that they need to be able to do to produce the localized content without needing that set of international touch points. No, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. I think a client would have the opposite opinion. In fact, if you said that you were going to do all your localization in-house, that should be a flag. That means somebody's probably using an online translation tool to localize content, and you're going to get a mess. We would have to get whatever exists for source files for the existing courses. Source files can be a range of things too, you know, depending on who developed it in the first place and what they used. Might be a PowerPoint file, it could be a complete XML file, it could be a series of Flash files and JPEGs and things like that. So the first thing we have to do is look at what exists and how easily can the text be taken out of it for consideration. And our next step will be to do that process, take the text out, look at the graphics and any other anything else in what exists to see how it will have to change. And once we have all that in hand, then it's basically like going from any English course or any language course into another language. We'll run through the localization process from there.